Okay, so first thing that I want to start off with saying is, as a martial artist, when one of our sort of philosophies for how we train is to not first of all be thinking about what are the techniques that we use. So, you know, like what they're called and what they do, but rather to have an idea of why we're doing the training and the sort of reasons why we're doing it. So it's sort of more like an underlying philosophy to how you apply yourself to the training rather than just learning particular movements. So for example, an idea of mindfulness and attention. So if you're practicing something, your very first goal when you're practicing whatever your teacher says we're going to work on today is realizing that your goal is to practice it with as much attention to detail as possible. So instead of just saying, okay, we're going to do this movement where this happens, and then this happens, and you're just doing like shape A, shape B, shape C, you're actually really focused on what am I feeling? How is this transmitting into my body? When do I have to make this arm deformation based upon the pressure coming in at me? Once I've made the deformation, how does it feel when I turn? Am I on balance, off balance? When I make the turn, how am I? Am I on the front foot, which is not good, or am I on the back foot, which allows me to turn better? Now when that happens, when is the moment when I bring my other arm forward to strike the person? If I encounter resistance, what exactly happens there? Am I balanced or not? So paying attention to every single little movement then takes it from shape A, B, and C into something that you actually learn a lot more from, because at the time you are more focused than just going through the motions. So this is sort of the way that we also want to think about, I think, excuse me, anything that we're learning. Instead of just taking the information in, just trying to think about exactly while we're taking it in, how we're going to apply it, etc. So one really important thing is this. Do you know what BS is? Does anybody not know what BS is?
Art Simpson.
It's bullshit. Okay, so one of the main components of everything that I try to teach people is existing without BS. Okay, in the wellness and fitness field, there's a lot of BS. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of weird, esoteric stuff that has especially an ulterior motive, like telling people certain things that they absolutely need because you have a vested interest in that. And I don't have any ulterior motive other than just trying to present information that is going to be helpful for people. The other part is just understanding what we're trying to achieve. Okay, so I like to look at things as like a pie chart. Okay, so here's a pie chart. So if we look at this shaded section of the pie chart, let's just say that this is everything that we are happy about. Okay, I'm just going to make that smaller just for illustration, but obviously that's not going to be the case for everybody, hopefully. And let's say that everything in this part here is things that we want to change. Okay? The only goal of the information that I want to provide is that we just make this shaded part a little bit bigger, and hopefully we can get it so that the shaded part is the greater part of the whole, so that we are happier with more of what we do in our lives rather than unhappy with the things that we do in our lives. The information that I provided is not like a miracle fix where I'm going to come in and say, I'm going to teach you exactly how you are going to completely change your life for the better, guaranteed. Because I don't believe that really anybody can do that. I believe that you take what you have and you just continue to improve it more and more, but you are never going to be 100% happy. A really good example of that was said by Alan Watts. Have you guys heard of Alan Watts before? Yeah. Anyone not heard of Alan Watts? He was an English guy who was around in the sort of 60s and 70s. He was one of the first people to bring sort of Eastern thought to the UK and to North America, particularly in California. And he has a very interesting thing that he said about everybody thinking that if they meditate and they do self-improvement stuff, that they're gonna eventually be perfect. And he said, imagine that you get to a perfect point where you're like a Buddha sitting on a floating lotus and you have no problems and everything's great. You're gonna be sitting there and then you're gonna be wishing that you were back at a time when you had challenges and things to work on, because it's not very fun being perfect because you've got nothing to work towards, right? And no challenges in life. So today's presentation is about the brain science behind habit change and why we can do certain things and can't do others. Okay, so first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about things like why we feel that we can't do things, or why people feel that they can't do things. And they often talk about things like self-sabotage, I'm weak, I have no willpower. These type of sort of like self-defeating type of ideas is often the reason why we give ourselves as to why we can't do something. That something could be anything. So for me, I talk a lot about things like weight loss, improved health, all that, because that's my wheelhouse, that's what I do. But this could be any type of habitual behavior that you find yourself involved in that is not serving you in a positive way, whatever that happens to be. Maybe you don't feel very happy all the time and you want to feel happier. Well, your habit is to not feel happy. You've told yourself a bunch of stories that are making you not feel happy, and maybe the thing that you want to change is that you want to be happier. But then every time you try, you feel like you're sabotaging your efforts, you feel like you're too weak to follow through, and you feel that you just don't have the motivation and willpower to do it. So this really applies to anything, but mostly we will talk about a bit more on the health and fitness side, because that is what we do here, but it doesn't have to be that. So our brain has these self-defense mechanisms that have us do things that go counter to what we actually want to do. If we want to lose weight or exercise more, but then we decide that, I'm going to eat a pastry, or I'm not going to go today, I don't feel like training today. So you really want to do it. You've told yourself you want to do it. You've seen the vision of yourself in the future, but yet for some reason you're doing things that are counter to that thing that you've said that you want to do. And this is where I don't believe that there's any such thing as self-sabotage. Because why would you sabotage yourself? If it's not as if you're having a second conversation in your brain where you're sort of deciding, you know what, I'm going to abandon my goals. So let's say that clean eating is your thing, and you said to yourself, I'm going to eat clean 5 days a week. And Monday was awesome. You ate clean, lots of celery, you juiced, you did all that stuff, you feel good about yourself. Tuesday comes, you walk past Mick's, you're like, there's almond croissants in there. And you go in there and you have an almond croissant. It's not as if you stood outside and you said, almond croissants. You know what? I'm going to abandon my plans for wanting to be healthier, and I'm going to go in there and do something completely counter to what I want to do with my life. You don't make that rational, conscious decision. You just react to some old behaviors and you just go in there and do it. And this is the reason why people do things that, let's call it like an addictive behavior, for example, and feel guilty later. I mean, if you look at someone who's a drug addict, they don't want to be a drug addict. It's not like they wake up in the morning and they're like, yes, gonna go get some crack. It's going to be an awesome cracky day. I'm going to go to bed, or maybe not go to bed tonight, feeling really awesome about all the crack that I did. They just go and automatically do crack, and then later on, at some point, they feel horrible and guilty about it, and they start going through the inventory of all the people that they've hurt and themselves that they've hurt, and maybe the kids that they're not looking after and all that stuff, and they feel terrible and horrible about it. They did not choose to do that. They just are automatically doing something that is what their habit is. So there's not really, like I said, a cognitive process, actual thinking process that makes that decision. Now the cognition, here we go into a bit of brain science, so I'll be watching you carefully, Mike. The cognition happens in a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, where rationalization happens and where we give meaning to things. So cognition is just the process of thinking. When a threat occurs, and so what I'm going to be talking about here is the idea of threat. So what happens when our brain feels something that's a threat, whatever it happens to be, and how do we deal with it. And when we get near the end of this, you'll sort of see why we're talking about threat, and how this very basic biological process is something that is harming us in the long run, and that we can hopefully change. So when the threat occurs, it happens in the central part of the brain, and also the perception of threat happens here too, and this part of the brain is called the limbic system. So when this area senses a threat, it shuts down the cognitive or the thinking part of the brain, and then the tasks that come of the threat, those are the tasks that it wants to take care of right away. And then why it wants to do that is so that it can take care of whatever this threat that it senses is, and then you can go back to cognition. You can go back to being rational and not reactively thinking. So in this case, what happens is your brain goes into a reactive state, and of course in this state, you're going to react to things. You're just going to make a decision like that. That's not really like a conscious decision. It's going to be a decision based upon past experience. So of course, we know that a better way to do things would be to respond by thinking about it, thinking about the consequence, realizing what the consequence is of this action we're thinking about taking, and then deciding whether or not we're going to take that action, because we can actually think, is this action going towards the goals that I have, or is this action going away from the goals that we have? Once the emergency response area in the brain is activated, you're basically on a very high reactive alert state, and so you're not responding. So the way that threat works is that your brain is constantly monitoring your environment for threats. So basically injury or danger, and that's kind of the highest level thing that our brain is doing all the time. We don't obviously realize it, but it's always scanning the environment at all times, looking for things that are going to threaten our survival, because survival is number one. That's the number one concern that our brain has, is us staying alive. That's it. So our brain, you could say, has a bit of a negativity bias because it's always looking around for things that can harm us. So your brain will then ask two questions. The first one is that, can I predict what is about to happen in this environment? So if you're walking down the street, you're pretty much sure that when you land your foot in the ground, the ground is going to be stable. You're pretty sure that nothing terrible is going to happen to you, so you're just walking along, and you can predict what's happening. If you're walking in a park, you can pretty much predict what's going to happen. Your foot's going to land on solid ground. You're going to be walking along. You might be a little bit more cautious about tripping over something, but you kind of know what's going to happen in the environment. The second question it asks is that, can I respond appropriately for this environment? So based on the current conditions, how will this situation affect my survival? That's what your brain is asking. So an example of when this can change is, let's say you're crossing the road, but you have a sore knee. So normally you go to cross the road, everything feels good. You have a bunch of ways that you predict when it's time to cross the road. If you have a sore knee, this is probably going to trigger a threat response. So the threat responses are fight, flight, or freeze. Most likely, if you have a sore knee, you're going to go into a little bit of the freeze response. So you're going to be looking for a larger than usual gap in traffic. You're going to take that moment to try to figure that out. You might go to a crosswalk, or you might go to an intersection where there's actually a light where you know that with your sore knee, you can make it across the street and the cars are going to be stopped, hopefully, because they've all seen a red light. But again, that's going to be the highest likelihood of survival, is going to a crosswalk, because most likely all the cars are going to stop. So to do these responses, your brain is relying on the sensory system. So those systems are sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and balance. The better your sensory systems are working, the lower the threat response. So a compromise to these systems will then initiate the threat response cascade, and this is your brain's plan for when there's a threat. So the first thing that happens in just a purely logical brain science way is that the amygdala in your brain, it sounds the alarm bell, and that is the sort of alarm bell area of the brain. This is right next to the hippocampus where all of your stories are kept. So everything that means something to you, if you're holding on to messages that would say, hey, that's a threat. So things that have had a past experience, or maybe even, we'll talk about this in a bit more detail a bit later, but even stories that you've told yourself as to why there's certain things that you can't do. It's in that part of the brain. So here's a good example. You might be walking down the sidewalk. You're walking along, suddenly a plastic bag comes blowing out of the bushes from the wind. So your alarm system might say snake, or in this neighborhood more likely skunk. And what are you going to do? You're not going to sit there and think, I wonder if that's a skunk. Let me look, let me see, is there a white stripe and a black body? Okay, yes, there is. Smells a bit, okay, it's a skunk. No, what your reactive brain is going to do is going to jump out of the way. Right away, right? It's going to respond. Hopefully it responds that way. It might also do what happens to a lot of people. We encounter this in martial arts, and we try to work this out of people a little bit in the martial arts, is the freeze response. Where you get attacked, your brain says, I can't believe this is happening, so I'm just going to do this. What happens next is norepinephrine is released, which is a neurotransmitter. This will speed up your brain functions and your heart rate, getting you ready for a fight or flight. So these are the biological processes that happen. What happens in fight is it'll fill your arms will fill with more blood to give you more strength and endurance to fight. Your legs will fill up with more blood, and that will get your legs ready to run. The next thing that happens is I don't know if I pronounce this properly, but I'll do my best, is your hypothalamus? Hypothalamus, thank you, Mike. It secretes corticotrophin, which releases a hormone, which is shortened as CRH, to spur your pituitary gland into action. What then happens is your pituitary gland releases adrenocorticotropic hormone. You can, when you're talking to your friends and trying to impress them at a party, just say ACTH after that or before, instead of trying to pronounce that thing, unless you have it written on your hand, which will then target the adrenal gland, which is near your kidneys. Then what happens is your adrenals are triggered into production of adrenaline and cortisol to enable you to get ready to act, and then to sustain that threat response if you need to sustain it. So maybe you have to battle against someone or something for a longer period of time, so you need to have the adrenaline and the cortisol in there to make that happen. So what then happens next is your threat response. So your fight, flight, or freeze. And this is a means to survive the threat. And it's all triggered as your primary means to survive a threat. So what then happens when this threat cascade in your brain has been initiated is that everything apart from the fight, flight, or freeze goes into a go slow mode. So your cognition goes into a go slow mode. Everything else does. It shuts down the cognitive part of your brain. You don't think anymore, you just react. You don't have rational thought, you only have action. That's all you have. What it also does is it shuts down the rest and digest part of your nervous system, so the parasympathetic nervous system is shut down because that is not relevant to the threat. It wants to give all the action and all the energy that your body has into the threat. So this is then what you're in the survival branch of your nervous system versus the thrive branch. And so this is the two terms you want to think about is the survive and thrive. The thrive is where you're actually rationally thinking about what you're doing, and you're able to make choices based upon rational thinking. Thrive is you're just reacting because survive is you're just reacting because you need this thing to happen so you don't get injured or die. Where this starts relating into fitness is that many people want to lose weight, they want to get fit, they want to feel better, so they want to thrive. But if the survive branch is on too much, it won't work because your brain is taking away your ability to thrive. So what we want to be trying to do if we're trying to affect change in a positive way is we have to try to make sure that we're spending more time in the thrive rather than in the survive part. So basically what happens with human physiology is it gives its priority to survival, like we talked about before. So the performance and the thrive activities are down-regulated while the threat remains. So that would be things like feeling better, improving anything, or performing better. Those are all down-regulated because we're just trying to survive. The survive and thrive, of course, are opposite ends of that threat spectrum. So the thrive activities just are not a priority while that system is active. So what we want to ask ourselves if we're trying to make a change of any kind is how many of the survive switches are we tripping through diet, stress, negative self-talk, the company you keep. All of those different things are things that we can cognitively think about and what I like to call our sober moments. So it doesn't mean the moments that you're not intoxicated. It means the moments when you're by yourself, you don't have any other influences, you're not emotionally triggered by other influences, and those times when you sit there and you actually think, what do I want to do, and am I doing right now the things that are going to make that happen. The non-survival goals, of course, are not important to the brain until the threat goes away, and so this does include the things like the weight loss, the appearance goals, and all of that stuff. We come then down to stress. So stress and threat are exactly the same thing. So this would be things like physical stress, emotional stress, if you're not sleeping enough, if you have nutritional stress or any kind of like physical stress, like you have too much weight, so it's difficult to do things. You don't have enough muscle, so it's difficult to do things. Your heart is working too hard for what you're trying to do. So your current level of fitness is low, and it's stressful to do that. So if you want to get a really good result in terms of looking better or perform better, feeling better, achieving your goals, etc., you then obviously have to try to move more into the thrive part of the nervous system. And up until now, you may have been stressing out about it, about going into the survive system. And this, of course, keeps you from achieving things because you're in the wrong system. So what we want to try to do is take a more holistic approach to this, and we want to start by looking at the health of the sensory systems. And this is something that not a lot of people are doing, but it's kind of the first way to start to get out of the survive and more into the thrive. And so this means looking at sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, balance, coordination, breathing, all of those things. Breathing is one that's really, really important. If we breathe normally and we breathe naturally and we're not in hyperventilation, we're calmer. That's just a physical, it's just an irrefutable fact. The quicker we breathe, if we get people who are suffering from anxiety, panic attacks and all that stuff, the number one thing that they are taught is when you start going into a panic, you got to get back into the cognitive side and ask yourself, how am I breathing? You're probably breathing like this, and you're not taking enough oxygen in. So your brain panicking is then making your body do things that's going to make you feel more panicked, because now your body is doing the activities that are robbing it of oxygen, that are making it feel like you're going to pass out. And it's actually going to make you pass out because you're robbing yourself of oxygen. And the passing out is the way that your body resets itself. Because if people who have panic attacks who pass out, when they pass out, their breathing will return to normal because they're unconscious and they'll go back into their body's natural state. So if we can work on our breathing cognitively, then when we're in a stressful situation, we can actually start recognizing how our breathing is working and we can get it under control. So at a base level, looking at the sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, balance, coordination, and breathing aspects, which, especially the balance and coordination and the breathing, we get that when we do fitness training. Those things will help to reduce your threat level quite considerably without you having to do anything else. So what oftentimes happens is that people want to make a change and they gain a whole bunch of stuff, and then everything that they gain they end up losing later. It's that idea of like the yo-yo dieting, the yo-yo exercising, where people exercise for a while, then they drop out, and they exercise for a while, then they drop out. Because what ends up happening is, of course, they're going oftentimes too hard, right? And then what happens? They trigger a threat response. I'm sore all the time. This is really difficult. This isn't fun. I'm depriving myself of food and energy. This is no fun. So what are you going to do? You're going to go back to the old behaviors that made you feel comfortable. There's a saying that the old-time strong people, the turn of the century, used to say, where they said, when you finish a workout, you should feel like you could walk out and still conquer a kingdom. So that basically means that what you're doing in the gym should make you feel good, not make you feel depleted. That being said, there are some times when you should go in there and see, what am I capable of? Test your limits and walk out there like, oh my God. You can't do that every single time. So it's all about the balance, right? What I believe is that you should be working it around, and what exercise science and all the experience of top level athletes believe is that if you train most of the time at around 70%, you'll get the best results. Because it's hard enough, but it's not taking you over that edge. Every now and again you move into your 80 or 90% zone because you want to push yourself and see that you're getting results. But you can't spend all your time in the higher percentage zones because you'll deplete yourself too much. And then that's when you're going to go into the negative side of things, because it's going to hurt, it's going to not feel good, you're going to be injured, you're going to have to take time off, all that other kind of stuff. So you're trying to find the Goldilocks zone where you're improving, but you're not depleting yourself too much. And that's basically what you want to try to do when you're training, is you want to try to find what is going to give me the result, which means that if you play soccer, if you're training, your soccer should get better. When you ride your bikes, you should feel what we're doing in here is improving the bike ride. If you're going on a bike ride and you're like, wow, I did worse than I did on that ride last year because my legs are so sore from kettlebell training, that's not effective training. That's just tiring you out. So these stressful things like the yo-yo of diet and exercise, the weight loss, trying to instill new healthy habits, all of these things are stressors. And your brain is stressed because you are taking what you are normally doing and you're trying to change it and improve it. And your brain sees that as getting out of your comfort zone and doing something else. So because that's perceived as threat and they're different to what you're used to, there's a lot of expectations attached to those things. A really good example is somebody who is very heavy and they're not confident about themselves, but they want to be in a relationship or something, right? When they're heavy, they've told themselves a story of, when I'm this heavy, I'm not going to be attracted to anybody. But I'm going to the gym. I'm eating well. I'm losing weight. When I get to that point, then I'm going to be able to go out there. I'm going to be more attractive. I'm going to be all of these things, right? Now that right now, when you say it, seems super positive, because you're going from someone who's kind of down on themselves, not going out so much, doesn't feel good in their clothes, doesn't like what they look like in the mirror. They're going to turn that around. They're going to like all those things. They're going to go out there. There's a whole new huge stress and pressure, because now that you've done that, you're no longer in the comfort zone of knowing exactly what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen every day, because your life is planned out. The way you deal with the stress of not liking yourself, you have all of the things in place to deal with that stress already. But when you improve that, all of a sudden now you have a bunch of new stresses, which is the higher level of expectation of yourself to get those things that you've always wanted, now that you've changed yourself into a person who looks like what you think that somebody would be attracted to, right? So it's kind of a weird thing. It's like people who suffer from anxiety and depression, they feel super comfortable in an anxious and depressed state. They don't feel as comfortable at first feeling good and not worried, because it's weird. And they're always expecting to feel worried. So what they oftentimes do is they do behaviors that put them back into anxiety and depression, because that's the devil they know. So this is the tricky thing about it, about trying to make that change, is that we have these things that we already use as our coping mechanisms, and what we have to do is find a way to get outside of those coping mechanisms. And we'll talk a bit about how to do that. So basically, to summarize that, is that the more that we're out of the threat, then it also kind of like will help to, it takes us back to old familiar behaviors, because we're scared of being out of that threat zone, and we go back into our old coping mechanisms. So the question is, because we know this is the way that the brain works, that's pretty logical, right? We can look at it from a logical standpoint, but this isn't a logical thing, because we're human beings. So how are we going to make these changes? There's no magic pill for that. Number one, we have to want to do it, and we have to be able to apply ourselves to do it, okay? Because it doesn't matter, like I said, there's information on the internet that right now we should all be here completely satisfied with everything. our mental state, our emotional state, our physical state. If we all wanted to have a six-pack right now, we should all have one, because the internet will tell us exactly how to get it. It's like, it's irrefutable, right? You know exactly how to do it, but why don't we do it? There's many reasons for that, and we've talked a little bit about those. The one thing that seems to work the most through all the studies that have been done on it is that in order to do this, number one, you have to do something. So that is the most important part, is that you actually have to decide that you want to make a change. And then once we've decided going to make a change, then we have to act upon that. Small steps rather than large, overwhelming changes is the way to go. It's the way to go in all the studies that have been done on it, and it's also the way to go in all the experience that I have ever had of everybody I've ever trained who has come in a certain way, wanted to get to a certain place, has gotten to that place, and then has stayed there and hasn't gone back and forth over and over again. The number one thing that they did was they took small steps. So they said to themselves, what's one thing I'm doing right now that I know is kind of sabotaging what my goal is? Like one guy, his example is, his workmates went to McDonald's for lunch 5 days a week. That's what they did. So what did he do? He switched, and he only went on 2 days. And on the 3 days, he brought a lunch. So he still got to go to McDonald's, enjoy the camaraderie of the friends and the workmates, but he just did 2 days instead of 3. Right away, he lost a bunch of weight, and he maintained that small change. So that weight that he lost, he rode on that for a couple months, because he lost it, and then he just kept himself. So now he was a guy who went to McDonald's 5 days a week. Now he's a guy who goes to McDonald's 2 days a week. That's who he is now, because he did a small change, right? What we tend to get sold is the more sort of raw approach of like a motivational speaker who you get together for a weekend seminar and you get all pumped up about all these things, and they tell you have to take massive action and you have to make all these changes and do all this stuff. And when you're surrounded by a group of people who are all feeling the same thing, it's very exciting. You make all these plans to do all this stuff. It's like when you go on vacation. You go on vacation, you can sit there and take a big inventory of all the stuff you're not doing because you're out of your regular life and all the stresses and influences your regular life. And then you could be eating so well, maybe you smoke, but you don't smoke on the vacation. You come back home, you have all the same stresses that you had before you left, and you go back into those old activities because what you're trying to do is become a new person. You can't become a new person overnight. Very few people have the ability to just say, I'm doing this now, I'm going to completely change it, I'm going to do something else. And what happens is maybe they do change it, but it's so overwhelming and so hard that they just go back to the old familiar stuff that they know. So the number one thing is take small steps rather than big overwhelming changes, and you have a much better chance of success. This also comes down to the idea of motivation and willpower. A lot of people are waiting around for that day that they feel like there's going to be that day when I wake up, because you hear it romanticized so much. Going to wake up and be like, yes, today is the day. Everything is going to change. This is it. I've got the motivation. I've got the shock of this willpower. It's in me. And then they go out in the world and they make everything the way that they want it. That doesn't happen. That's not real. That's like a fantasy thing that we oftentimes get sold, but it's not true. The way that you get motivation and willpower is you have to have grit to start doing something to make the change, because it's not easy, and you have to cognitively realize it's not easy. And I need to apply myself, and even when I fail, I got to keep on applying myself over and over and over again to change that one small thing. Once you've changed that one small thing, then motivation and willpower grows from that, because you did something, it made you feel like you could do it, and that's when that fire starts. And then you do something else and the fire's bigger because you've done it and you believed in it. And then the fire of the willpower, the motivation keeps growing, and then eventually you do become someone who has more willpower or more motivation, but it's not something that you're just going to discover from out of nowhere. And unfortunately, that idea is peddled a lot, so there's a lot of people just waiting around for that one day they're going to get their spark of motivation and inspiration, and it just does not work. What works is small steps, accepting failure, forgiving yourself for the failure, learning from the failure, rationally and cognitively, why did I fail, and then do the opposite thing. And then accomplish that first thing, once you've accomplished that first thing, you can then move on and start accomplishing more things because you have that traction. Tell people about it. Let other people know, like in your circle who you trust, let them know that that's something that you're going to do. Because when you put it out there, it's a very good point. When you put it out there, it's out there now. It's not just within you. And even just writing it down, that's putting it out there. Writing it down and then repeating it. So this goes along to one really important thing I found very helpful for myself and very helpful for a lot of people is the idea of having a mantra. A mantra does not have anything to do with religion. Okay, because a lot of times people talk about a mantra, everyone's like, oh, that's a Buddhist thing. Oh, but I don't want to get into some other religion. I believe in another religion, or I believe in no religion. It has nothing to do with religion. Things like mindfulness, mantras, all those things, every religion has that. Every religion has meditation. No matter what it's called, they all have a version of that idea, right? It's just that it tends to be thought more about a Buddhist thing, but every religion has it. Because they have known over time, even without all the brain science that now has proven to us that people who meditate are able to go into thrive more easily than people who don't. We know that now from studies of the brain. But this has been known for thousands of years that people who meditated tended to be able to improve themselves better because they're able to be in a thinking state more often and they don't run into reaction as quickly, right? So we have stories about every single thing that we want to change. So whatever you want to change, you have a story as to why it hasn't changed. That story is going on in your subconscious all the time. When you're trying to change it, the story is fighting you changing it. How do you change it? You put a new story in there. How do you put a new story in there? If that story is going over and over and over again in your subconscious, you have to consciously install a new story. And that's why things like a mantra is very, very important to make that happen. An example from my life is, a lot of people don't know this, but I suffer from anxiety. I've suffered from anxiety for a long time. I had panic attacks started like almost 20 years ago. I had to go and seek help for it. It was really bad, and it really, really affected my life for a long time. But I put out a vibe to most people of being a confident person, because I am a confident person. I understand how to be confident because I had to retrain myself how to be more confident after having a few years of feeling super anxious all the time and worried about everything. And one thing that I got from someone that I talked to was they said, you know, at the time I was worried about my health. I was worried that I had some kind of dread diseases because I was so anxious, and I was having those anxiety symptoms that felt like a heart attack, or like my left arm would be numb for like a couple days. And I was like, oh my God, I'm dying, like something terrible is happening, or my lungs are all messed up because like I can't breathe properly. It was all anxiety, but I thought I had some terrible health problems. And this person said, you know, you need a mantra because your brain is running a story right now that you're dying, your heart's weak, and you have like lung cancer or something. So you just need to find something to say. So we worked on it, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like, my body heals itself, I'm not sick, it's just the anxiety, relax and breathe. And I said that to myself every single day, numerous times, and I just remember, I don't even remember when it changed, but one day I remember thinking, wow, I haven't worried about that for weeks. Because I changed the story in my brain. And you know what? My arm wasn't numb anymore. I could get full breaths again. So I wasn't sick, because if I was sick, my arm would still have been numb and I wouldn't have been able to breathe, and it actually would have been worse, right? It wouldn't have just magically gotten better, it would have gotten worse, right? If my heart was failing, I would have gotten worse. If my lungs were failing, it would have gotten worse. And ever since then, I have found that when there's things that I want to change for myself, I just try to think of a mantra. Going into business for myself and dealing with things that I wasn't normally used to dealing with, as far as running this place as opposed to just training people. I have a mantra that I use now, which is, it's only a situation, nothing is happening, let go of the outcome. And I say that to myself every day over and over and over again because I'm a worrier. And if I don't say that to myself, I start to think that this is like a big deal and a huge amount of things are happening and oh my God, this terrible thing is gonna happen. But I'm able to tamp that down by reminding myself that it is only a situation, nothing is actually happening, and just let go of the outcome so I can see things as they are. And I would recommend to anybody who's trying to make a habit change, come up with a mantra for yourself that runs counter to the story that you're telling yourself about that particular thing. And remember, don't come up with 10 mantras for the 10 things that you think you need to change. Pick the one that you think is going to be either the easiest to change or the one you want to change the most. Come up with a mantra for that and then program that into your brain. That NLP, neuro-linguistic programming stuff that Tony Robbins does, it's all about that kind of a thing, right? It's just about that you are what you think, your thoughts make the world. So because that's the case, the more that you're able to think about the world that you want to create, you will eventually become that, but you have to drill it in there because it has to overtake the old story. So my number one advice for anybody who wants to make a change is come up with something that runs counter to the story that you're telling about that one thing that you want to change. And believe me, you will believe it. You just have to say it to yourself over and over again. Because people who say to themselves, I'm not worthy of whatever it is, they've told themselves that so many times. That's their mantra, right? That's their mantra is I'm not worthy of this. I'm never going to get this. I may as well just accept that this is what my life is going to be like. That's their mantra. They haven't consciously said, I'm making a mantra, a very negative one that's going to make me super depressed and upset. No, that's just the one that they kind of invented. But we can actually consciously make one, right? So the idea, just with a little bit of drawing, so kind of what the idea of that is there's a really great illustration of that. If this is us, or if this is us or you, or whoever you want to call it. So this is kind of the world that we live in within ourselves and within our mind. So this is where all these things are happening, all these stories that we've told ourselves, the way that we react to situations is there. If we're only here, and this is where things like a mantra or mindfulness, like if you meditate, and again, not religious based, just sit down, listen to what's going on, and just listen to your breath, and just teach yourself how to go to a place where you're not thinking about stuff all the time. Or if a thought comes into your brain, you acknowledge it, and you let it go, and you just continue to think about the present. And that thought might come back in a million times, but the more and more you just let it go, you'll learn to let it go. And when you're in a situation where something's happening, that you start to trigger that threat response, you'll be able to have more cognition to recognize what's going on. The issue is that if you're in this bubble of you, you're just going to be reacting all the time because that's where you are. What the idea of a mantra or mindfulness training of any type, whatever type speaks to you, is that this happens, this appears. So this is you, Y. This is W. This is the watcher. The watcher is also you. But now, when you is going through these things and all these things are happening and the stories are happening and the automatic things are happening, the watcher is looking down and observing those things. And that's all that a mantra or mindfulness training will accomplish. That you are able to actually watch what you're doing. Here's where the cognition is now. You can watch it, you can say, I'm out front of Mick's, I'm smelling that croissant, I really want that croissant, and then the watcher can say, oh yes, but let's not forget what our actual goals were. Our goals are we're going to eat clean this week. Eating clean this week does not mean going into Mick's, but you've made an agreement with yourself that you're going to eat clean Monday to Friday, and you're going to allow yourself on Saturday to have something. So you know what? Let's table that croissant, and let's go back on Saturday and get that croissant, because the watcher is actually able to observe what's going on. What eventually they say is really good to do is to see how many levels you can create. And the more mantra and mindfulness training that you do, you're able to create a series of you in your bubble of reacting. The you that watches this, that is then able to affect change here,
but then you can have a watcher that watches the watcher watching it, and then you can also have a watcher that watches the watcher that's watching the watcher that is watching you. And the more of these levels that you can create of cognition away from the storm of what's happening right now in that sort of reactive mind, then the better chance you have of chipping away at those things that you want to change. And like we talked about in the beginning, it's only about making the pie chart bigger and hoping that either it's like that now and you want to do it better. If it's not like that now and you'd like to have it where you're like 80% of everything's good and then you only have 20% of things you're not happy about you can start working on, that's all good. But that's all we really can hope for, is that slow improvement. And by thinking of it this way, it's very helpful, because then when you're about to go into an activity, like when I go into an activity that's fear-based, for example, I go back in my office and I know I got a bunch of emails to do. This Steve right here is like, oh man, that's a lot of work. You gotta sit down, you gotta do all that stuff. Maybe you should just take a few minutes and check out what's new today on YouTube. But then, not all the time, but sometimes the watcher can come in and say, are you really gonna just go on YouTube? Like, you know that you're supposed to be going back there and getting those things done. And if you don't get those things done, the things you have to do tomorrow, you have to do those things too. Okay, maybe I should do that. Do I do it all the time? Absolutely not. Do I do it more than I used to because I really try hard to work on these things? Yes, I definitely do it more than I used to, but I'm never not going to procrastinate. And I'm always going to have a day where I feel guilty that I wasted a bunch of time when I should have been doing something that would have been higher purpose, right? And it's that kind of idea of like, here's the sort of lower thing, here's the higher thing. This is the thing that's not going to help you. This is the thing that's going to help you. All we're really trying to do is, as much as we can, move more up towards this. But we're always going to have that, because if the idea of yin and yang, for example, you have to have one. You can't, I mean, you wouldn't know good if you didn't have bad, and vice versa. All we want to try to do is, again, how can we make that slightly higher choice? It comes from observing what we're actually doing and then being able to spend more time in that cognitive zone. And I think it's very freeing to know that your brain does this stuff, because now you actually can say, this is what my brain is doing, rather than just thinking you're a runaway train out of control. And this is how, if you're looking to affect some kind of a change in a habit, by knowing these things and then working on things like a mantra, trying to become more mindful so you can start watching yourself, identifying your stressors, actually sitting down in those sober moments, identifying what they are, even writing down what they are, and then writing down what is the counter to this. And then looking at it all the time. And that's where the doing comes in, right? My business is called Do Strength, because if you don't come in here and lift weights and do something, you don't get strong. It doesn't matter, like I said before, if we all want to be bodybuilders, we should all be sitting here like giants, because the internet will tell us exactly how to do it. All the information on there, what supplements to take, what steroids to inject, all that stuff is on there. We don't need to go find out or figure it out ourselves. It's all out there to do it. The only reason why, if that's what we wanted, we wouldn't be sitting here like that, is because we didn't actually take action and make it happen. So it does come down to, you have to take action without a doubt. But again, going back to the idea of take a small action, find the one thing, change that thing, build the momentum. Keep in mind that working on changing your story is going to be a huge thing, but you have to focus on that consciously, and also coming up with that mantra, right? Coming up with that thing that you can tell yourself over and over and over again that is going to take that stuff away. Because real results come from consistency, not intensity. And this is like a good example I use is the example of the boot camp that you take before you go on vacation. So you want to go on vacation, oh my God, I got to lose 10 pounds. You go and take this crazy boot camp where you work so hard, you're sweating, you're dying, your technique is horrible, doesn't matter. You lose that 10 pounds. You starved yourself. When you come back, of course, you gain 10 pounds back. Because what did you do? You did something that was completely crazy, not sustainable. You got what you wanted, then you came back and you went back to your regular life, and here you are back again where you were before, or possibly a little bit worse. One more thing I just want to talk about when it comes down to this is, I think it's very important to look at past successes and ask yourself that question. How come I was able to do that thing, which was actually very difficult, but how come I can't do this other thing? Like, Another example just from my life is I'm really good at, like, I'm doing intermittent fasting right now. I don't eat until 1 p.m. 5 days a week. When I make a smoothie in the morning, I make it earlier and I bring it to work so that if I'm working after 1, I can have it right away in case I don't get to go home. And I also, since I'm such a fantastic and loving husband, I make my wife's smoothie as well and I put it in the fridge for her. When I make a smoothie and I scoop out the nut butter or whatever and I put it in there and some gets on my finger, I take a paper towel or I run the tap and I wipe it off. I won't lick it off my finger because I'm not eating till 1. I'm amazing at that discipline. Yet there's a bunch of other stuff that I do, like procrastinating and time wasting, that I do it very easily and I'm not very disciplined on it. But then I ask myself, what is it that makes me disciplined at this one thing? And how can I transfer the discipline of the thing that I'm really disciplined at to the other? Because it's exactly the same mechanism. There's just a reason why you're more disciplined for one and for the other. But it's also helpful to remind yourself, what are those things that I'm really good at, that I disciplined myself and got good at? And then that makes you feel good because you know you can do it. And then when it comes time to do the thing that's more difficult, it gives you more motivation and willpower because you realize that you're not a failure. You're just failing at the moment on that one particular thing.
You have more confidence too.
Yeah, it builds confidence. So that, I think, super important. What can really help with that is tracking it. So I would say that for any of you who want to make a habit change, remember the biological things that are happening so you can stop blaming yourself because your brain is going into that mode and it's not your fault that that's happening. There are things that you can do to turn that around, but it's also really good to track those things. And because we live in this great modern age, I highly recommend an app called Productive. It's free. You can buy like a more expensive version and get all these reports and stuff, but at the end of the day, all you're trying to do is just see how often you're doing the habit. It's a really great way to just track that every day. It will remind you, hey, have you tracked your habit today? And then you can go in and you can do that thing that's working you towards the eventual goal that you have. And it's great because it provides a lot of motivation at the end of the week, since you can look at it and it gives you a report. And it just feels good to look at it and see 5 green bars because you did those 5 days. But then also if you see you didn't do it, it reminds you like, okay, yes, I failed that week, but then you can look back at the past and realize, oh yeah, that's not a big deal because I did it for a certain number of days. And if I count all the days up of the month, I actually did it more often than I didn't do it. Another thing that I really like to use is what I call the number method. So some of you may have noticed I have a number on my right hand all the time. You may not have noticed that, but if I'm trying to affect a certain habit change, what I do is I'll tell myself, okay, I want to do this many days this week. And I write down my hand 1, and I do it on the first day. And then if the second day, if I do that thing, I write down number 2. If the third day I don't do it, the most important component of any habit change is searing self-honesty. You have to be honest that you didn't do it. Don't give yourself credit for something you didn't do. Just start again. And what I do is I have an Instagram account called The Number Method, and it's all pictures of my hand from like the last year or so. And what I do is at the end of the month, I count up how many numbers did I get. And it's really awesome because when we fail, we feel really bad about it. So you did it well for 5 days and you fell off day 6. What do you think about day 6? And you obsess about day 6 and you're a failure because of day 6. And I'm a terrible person, I can't do it. What about the 5 days that you did it right? A habit tracker, writing a number on your hand, any of these things where you're able to track it, it's really good because it helps you to turn around that perception that the failure is the thing that you're supposed to be thinking about. The successes are the things you're supposed to be thinking about to then allow you to be able to move further on. So something like this or a habit tracker, I recommend everybody use so that at the end of the month, if you're feeling down about the stuff you didn't do, go back and count all the stuff you did and just feel good about that fact.
I was just gonna say, like, do you think for people who may not necessarily be smartphone users or wanting to write on their hands, do you think journaling would be something that would be
anything that you
useful
can
to as
track
well?
it? Yeah. I like writing on my hand because I look at it all the time. So my dominant hand, I'm always looking at it. And that helps me to remind myself that this is what I'm gonna do. It reminds me to say my mantra. Every time I look at it, I say my mantra. So it's right out there. On the phone, it's great because it reminds you to do it. But yes, if you don't have a phone, or don't know how to use the phone, or don't like using the phone, or you don't want to write on your hand and explain to people why you have a number on your hand, yes, do a journal. The important thing, of course, is you got to review that journal at the end of every week to be, and again, count up the days of success. And then again, that's your mantra, if you will, is looking at how many days of success, reminding yourself, like this month, why am I feeling so down? Because I ate 3 croissants. I had 28 days of amazing eating. So the 3 croissant days, those go into the background. But unfortunately, what our brain likes to do is focus on the negative part. And if we don't have a way of reminding ourselves of the positive part, then we're just gonna again start telling ourselves that negative story. So in order to flip it around, we have to make a conscious effort to actually start looking at our successes and appreciating the fact that we were successful. So ends my presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
So our first mantra needs to be that we need to be a cup half full person, not a cup half empty person.
Yeah, I mean, your mantra could be the cup is half full. And you can say it to yourself over and over and over again. And within a very short period of time, you are gonna believe that because you've now implanted that as your story. It just works. It's very simple, but it just works. But again, of course, you have to do it. And that's what it all comes down to at the end of the day is, why is one person more successful than another person? It has nothing to do with talent, right? In the martial arts world, we see that all the time. The person who has the biggest school is not the best instructor. It's the person who focuses on learning how to market, how to have nice uniforms, how to have it when people walk in, they see what they expect to see at a martial arts school, which is like some Japanese writing on the wall, a big flag, everyone lined up looking nice in their crisp uniforms, and they walk in that school and like, I see my path. My path is the white belts are here. And all the way down there, the black belts, and oh, their gis are cooler, and they got this neat belt, and they're given more respect, and they actually are allowed to teach sometimes. And so they come in and they see that. But if you go into a school where it's completely disorganized and you don't see any of that hierarchy, the teacher might be the best teacher in the world. But you don't know any different, because the person teaching the karate school who has everyone lined up and it's beautiful and clean, and there's photos on the wall and flags and Japanese writing and all that stuff, they're better than you still. So it doesn't matter that the other person at the other school is better than them. As long as they're that much better than everyone who comes in the door and they have the best presentation, they're gonna have 1,000 paying students and be driving a G-Wagon and have a nice house and be going on vacations 4 times a year. And the martial artist who actually has the skill and the talent, but who doesn't have as good business acumen and organization, that martial artist will not do as well as that person. And every single industry and business is like that. It is not about the best product. It's about the best way of learning how to market that product and sell the dream to people. And that's what we have to do for ourselves. We gotta sell our dreams to ourselves in the best way, because it doesn't make a difference about talent. Talent is absolutely not the thing that is gonna take someone to the top. There are many talented people, you've seen lots of documentaries about it, that super talented guy in high school. I mean, look at Johnny Manziel in the NFL. He won a Heisman, and then he got a few $1 million, and he partied and was out at the clubs all the time, and he got let go by the Browns, and now he's a quarterback in Montreal, and he's not even playing that well now. That guy should have been.
He was playing in Montreal. He's been banned from the CFL.
Okay, so there you go, right? Johnny Manziel, amazing talent. There's guys in the NFL who are not as good as Johnny Manziel who are making millions of dollars and might even win a Super Bowl. Only because they figured out how to follow the path to success. And that's it.